Alright, so this video is going to talk about the basics of graphing cosine functions. And so I'll do kind of the basics and some of the transformations that are pretty easy to do. And then I'll do a different video on period changes and horizontal shifts and things like that where it can get a little crazy. So if you haven't checked out my videos on sine functions, that'll be really helpful, kind of get the style and feel of it. But here we go, cosine functions, let's get down to business. So y equals cosine of x. Alright, so the way that we're going to graph this first is I'm just going to plot points. And so I'm going to plug in the x values and get out the y values. So if you plug in x and you get 0, cosine of 0 would be 1. Okay, cosine of pi halves would be 0, cosine of pi would be negative 1, cosine of 3 pi would be 0, and cosine of 2 pi would be 1. So once again, if you kind of think about your journey around the unit circle, there's 0, there's pi halves, there's pi, there's 3 pi halves, and here's 2 pi. You're just kind of going around the unit circle and evaluating the cosine values, and that'd be 1 revolution. So the period of a cosine function also is 2 pi, just like sine. And so from 0 to 2 pi, we should be able to get 1 full sine curve. So I'm going to make some notches on my graph paper that I've got here. And I'm going to make my y-axis also go by 2 squares. And so we're going to label our axes because our axes, once again, aren't necessarily always accustomed to being angles. So we're going to do negative 2 pi, negative 3 pi halves, negative pi halves, 0, and then this is pi halves, pi, 3 pi halves, and 2 pi. Remember that your x values should be equidistant. So whatever x values you're using, they should be equally spaced apart, and ours are spaced apart by pi halves. So let's plot some points. So 0, 1 would be up here. Pi halves 0 is there. The next one at pi negative 1. 3 pi halves is 0. And then 2 pi is back at 1. And so here's what one cosine curve looks like. Kind of missed that last one. Let's try that one more time. Alright, and that's what one cosine period looks like. So from 0 to 2 pi, you've got yourself 1 period. And that's how it should look. Okay, and we can make another one. So from negative 2 pi to 0, and we're just going to follow this pattern of down, down, up, up. And you should be able to make your cosine curve. Okay, if you want to do the domain, you can keep making them because you can keep going around the unit circle. The domain is just going to be all real numbers. The graph goes all the way to the left and to the right. But the range is not all real numbers, and hopefully you can see that it would, the lowest it would go is negative 1, and the highest it would go is positive 1. Okay, and so a cosine graph looks like this. And now we're going to move forward. Alright, so let's start talking about the transformations that we have. This video is going to touch on, for cosine graphs, it's going to touch on this guy right here, vertical shifts, and amplitude. And I would really encourage you to watch my sine videos so that then you can kind of see how vertical shifts and amplitude work. But if you just need to see cosine, well then here we go. Okay, just remember that for both the vertical shifts and the amplitude, there's a direct relationship. So you don't have to think about what's the reciprocal or should it be the opposite. It's none of that. If you see a +2 at the end of a cosine graph, like we do here in this first example, then we know it's automatically a vertical shift up 2. If the coefficient in front of the sine or cosine graph is 3, like it is here, then that's automatically the amplitude. So it's a direct relationship for those transformations. Okay, so here we go. First one. As I said in my other videos, I'll say it again, you want to break this function down before you actually try to graph it so that you can kind of get the pieces you need. So we're going to look for amplitude, we're going to look for the period, we're going to look for vertical shifts, and your teacher will probably ask you for the domain and range. And so we'll see how that goes. That'll come in at the end. Okay, so let's break it down. Amplitude found by the coefficient, that's 3. The period is 2 pi, there's no period change, and your vertical shift is up 2, and so there is our vertical shift. We're not just going to write, we're not just going to write 2, we are actually going to write up 2, sorry about that. Okay, and cosine also has a domain of all real numbers always. Okay, so let's get to graphing. So I'm going to plot some notches here. Our period is 2 pi, so that means we're just going from 0 to 2 pi. We're going to go by 1s on the y-axis. Okay. We'll go by 2s here. And so if we're just going from 0 to 2 pi, then we can find all the x values in the middle. That'd be pi, pi halves, and 3 pi halves. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to draw on our midline. So the midline is at 2 because we got shifted up 2. So it's always the vertical shift. So there's up 2. And then remember, your graph should be equally above and equally below the middle line. So let's get to graphing. Remember, cosine is going to start up the amplitude. Sine starts at the middle, but cosine is going to start up the amplitude. So 1, 2, 3. So my first point will be there at 0, 5. Then we'll go down 3 more, up, and then up 3 more. And of course, yes, it looks like a V, but don't draw a V because that's not what a cosine curve does. It's curvy, but it does represent a V. It's not a parabola either, but the pattern of it is that V. And you can keep it going. Don't forget to label your axes. That's always a good thing, so that you can be thorough. Negative 2 pi, negative 3 pi halves, negative pi, and negative pi halves. Okay, and finish that out with your graph. So here's my second period. We'll go in this color. Alright, so there is 2 full periods of a cosine graph. So what's the range, right? So how low does the graph go? The graph goes to -1, and the highest it goes is to 5. And there's your range. Alright, so hopefully that makes sense. Cosine graphs and sine graphs are very similar in the way that you graph them. You just have to remember how they start and remembering their pattern. Cosine starts off the middle line, and sine starts on the middle line. Okay, so let's do one more. If you want to hit pause on the video, you can, and try it yourself on some paper, and then you can kind of follow along with me after to see if you got it right, or you can just follow along now. Alright, so feel free to hit pause and then come back. But here we go, the breakdown, right? Amplitude, we've got period, we've got the vertical shift, and we can do some domain and range again. Alright, so amplitude is 2, but since it's negative, I know I need to do a reflection. The period is still 2 pi, and the vertical shift is down 4. So I'm making some notches. Since the period's still 2 pi, nothing's changed there. That means we'll go from 0 to 2 pi. Put my values up here. Pi, pi halves, 3 pi halves. Okay, and then we'll go to -2 pi as well. Alright, and I'll fill in these x values. -3 pi halves, -pi, -pi halves. Alright, and so first thing you want to plot is you want to plot the vertical shift, so it's down 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so there's -4. There's my midline. And then remember, you're going to start off the midline, up the amplitude normally with cosine, but it's reflected, so we're actually going to start down the amplitude. So it'll be at 0, -6. And then we'll go up the amplitude again, down the amplitude, and then down the amplitude again. The graph should finish where it starts. Okay, and then I'll keep the pattern going. Alright, and there is our graph of that cosine function. Okay, domain's all real numbers, and the range is, what's that, lowest it goes is -6, and the highest it goes is -2. Okay, that's kind of the basics of graphing a cosine function. Alright, hopefully you enjoyed it, and best of luck to you. Talk to you soon.